Welcome to The Truth, and another busy week for President Donald Trump and his second week as the 47th President of the United States. And Tulsi Gabbard went to Capitol Hill to sit for questioning for her nomination as the nation's top intelligence chief. And they gave her a rough time. They just come up with these things out of left field that are purely and simply designed to make someone look bad, for their own political agendas. Ms. Gabbard held her own. She kept her composure. Tulsi Gabbard, as you recall, she is the person who served in our armed forces for 20 years, achieving the rank of captain, and then became a public servant. She ran for Congress from Hawaii and won. She served several terms in Congress, and she rapidly became a rising star. The Democrats identified her as a leader, as a rising star, and they promoted her every step of the way. She got the Plum Committee assignments. She became a national figure, and then they offered to make her chairperson of the Democratic National Committee. Well, somewhere along the line, she decided that she would run for president of the United States. And guess who she was running against? Hillary Rodham Clinton. And that's when the train got off the rails. Man, they came for Tulsi Gabbard like nobody I have ever seen. And Hillary Clinton identified her as a Russian agent. Really? Textbook 101 Clinton speak. Just go after your opponent. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not, but just cut them to smithereens. Well, here's a little bit of an analysis of what happened in her Capitol Hill interview that took place between Tucker Carlson and Matt Taibbi.
Why can't we trust her with America's secrets? Well, of course we can. So what is this? And it really is, people are panicked that what they've been doing is going to come to light, I think.
Well, they should be panicked because if you read the executive order on the weaponization of government, it specifically empowers the Director of National Intelligence to conduct a wide-ranging report into the possible misdeeds of the entire intelligence community and orders her to come up with anything negative that they can find.
Holy shit.
So can you imagine?
No.
Right? I mean, that's like trying to make a list of everything. She'll be doing it from now to the end of time. But no, I mean, in perfect seriousness, it's setting the stage for, kind of a second church committee hearings era. And that was a great moment in American history.
Once every 50 years.
So as I said, Ms. Gabbard held her own, but the fact of the matter is that the votes are going to be split right down the middle. Republicans have a 3-vote margin in the Senate, but as we know, there are some Republicans who aren't very Republican in the Senate. Susan Collins and the senator from Alaska, Murkowski, come to mind. And then you got the old crow, Mitch McConnell. He voted against Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. What is the matter with him? And these people that say they're Republicans and then vote with the Democrats, I'm tired of it. I would imagine that you are too. So that's what Ms. Gabbard has to contend with. On Hegseth's nomination, it was a split decision. And J.D. Vance, as president of the Senate, he's vice president of the United States, but has the title of president of the Senate, cast the tie-breaking deciding vote and got Pete Hegseth over the line. I would not be surprised if we witness a similar ordeal with Ms. Gabbard. We'll know soon enough, but the Democrats are in panic mode. They know that she is tired of political narratives, and she is a purveyor of the truth, and she feels mistreated by a lot of the leadership in our nation's government. Obviously, she doesn't like the Democrats because they raised her all the way up the flagpole only to cut the legs out from underneath her when she had the tenacity and the nerve to run against Hillary Clinton. And she wasn't very charitable. She has got a score to settle. I don't think she's out for revenge. I think she's out for accountability and the truth. Well, speaking of the truth, so is Kash Patel. He similarly had a turn in the barrel when he went to Capitol Hill this week, and they didn't go too lightly on him, and they went back and dug out things that he had said in the past, took them out of context, as they're known for doing. And here's a little snippet of what his testimony and his experience looked like.
Mr. Patel, early in this hearing, Senator Durbin asked you about the January 6th choir of inmates whose song you promoted, and here's what you said. I did not have anything to do with the recording. I did not have anything to do with the recording. Do you stand by that testimony, Mr. Patel?
Senator, what I said was I didn't do the recording.
You said you didn't have anything to do with the recording, which is interesting because here's what you told Steve Bannon on his podcast. So what we thought would be cool is if we captured that audio and then, of course, had the greatest president, President Donald J. Trump, recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Then we went to a studio and recorded it, mastered it, digitized it, and put it out as a song now releasing exclusively on the War Room. We. If you had nothing to do with it, Mr. Patel, why did you tell Steve Bannon and all his listeners that you did?
That's why it says we, as you highlighted.
Yeah, and you're part of the we, right? When you say we, that includes you, doesn't it, Mr. Patel?
Not in every instance.
Well, that's new. So when you said we, you didn't really mean you. Is that your testimony?
Not unless you have a new definition for the word we.
Oh, okay. I always thought we included the person who pronounced the word, but maybe not. Well, you also said this, Mr. Patel. We were able to capture the recording thanks to their courageous singing, and we were able to take it to a studio. So let me ask you, Mr. Patel, after saying we took it to a studio, did you take it to a studio?
Me personally, no.
After you said that we digitized and recorded it and all that, did you take it to a studio and digitize and record it?
Me personally, no.
Okay, so you were lying to Steve Bannon and his audience. Is that what you're saying?
No, I was using the proverbial we appropriately, as you've identified.
The royal we. Oh, I see. And so you certainly promoted the hell out of it, though, didn't you?
I don't know what that means, but I promoted the heck out of raising money for families in need.
With promotions on social media and saying you were going to get this to #1 on the billboards, right, Mr. Patel?
I think it did.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Isn't that great? People who violently attack police have a #1 song thanks to you, Mr. Patel. That's something to be really proud of. Now, you've claimed, Mr. Patel, you didn't know about any of these people in the choir. Is that right?
I did not know about the violent offenders, and I did not participate in any of the violence in and around January 6th.
Tell me, Mr. Patel, what due diligence did you do to find out who was in the choir before you promoted their beautiful music? These people who assaulted law enforcement. What due diligence did you do?
Senator, I didn't record it myself.
So you did no due diligence before you promoted this song by these violent felons. Is that what you're telling us?
Senator, I did not record that myself.
So you're being considered for director of the FBI. And here you did no diligence to find out whether people you were associating with now the President of the United States in song were convicted of attacking police officers. Is that who we want running the FBI? I want you to turn around. There are Capitol Police officers behind you. They're guarding us. Take a look at them right now. Turn around.
I'm looking at you. You're talking to me.
No, look at them. I want you to look at them if you can, if you have the courage to look them in the eye, Mr. Patel, and tell them you're proud of what you did. Tell them you're proud that you raised money off of people that assaulted their colleagues, that pepper sprayed them, that beat them with poles. Tell them you're proud of what you did, Mr. Patel. They're right there. They're guarding you today. Tell them how proud you are.
That's an abject lie, and you know it. I've never, ever accepted violence against law enforcement. I've worked with these men and women, as you know.
You
my entire
glorified
life,
it in song,
and I did
Mr.
not
Patel.
make a single dime out of
In
it.
song. Well, let me.
How about you ask them if I have their backs, and let's see about that answer.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Patel.
We need Kash Patel. Everybody who knows Washington and is right thinking that wants a government that is founded on morality and ethics and the truth know that we need Kash Patel. There are so many things that we want the answers to. We want to know what did happen in Butler, Pennsylvania on July the 13th. Who planned it? Who orchestrated it? And was that Thomas Matthew Crooks on the AGR building, or was it someone else? There's a lot of reason to believe that it may not have been Crooks. We also want to know, regardless, who were the person or persons who traveled from Washington, D.C. and Gallery Place and visited Crooks' house just prior to the attempted assassination. 2 or 3 visits from someone from Gallery Place. That's where the Secret Service, the FBI, and ATF have offices. So it proves nothing, but it does certainly raise a lot of questions. We want the answers. Kash Patel is a guy that can get them. We'd like to know the Epstein files. Who did travel on the Lolita Express to Epstein's Island in the Caribbean? We would like to see the Kennedy files and the Martin Luther King files. They're coming out. We don't want the redacted version. We want the unredacted version. And I hope the files are complete. I hope they haven't destroyed evidence and buried evidence. It is time for the truth to come out. We would also like to know everything about 9/11. There is speculation that 9/11, that we don't know the whole story, that you look at the video of Building 7, that's kind of the telltale sign that something is amiss. And also in one of the towers, after the airplane hit the tower and smoke started coming out of the floors where the plane hit, about 2 floors above it, you can see an explosion. Now, this explosion then resulted in the tower starting to collapse from the top down. And many people think that there's a whole lot more to the story than what we've been led to believe. Building 7 collapsed at 6 p.m. on 9/11. It looked like a controlled demolition. We're led to believe that the structure was weakened because of falling debris from the Twin Towers. But when you go back and look at the tapes, you don't see falling debris hitting Building 7. It looks like a controlled demolition. Now, I have been very reluctant to go there because it sounds so far-fetched. The fact is, I don't know. All I know is that right now there are more questions than answers. We need the answers. We need all the truth to come out. What am I leaving out? We'd like to know who Ralph was, who laid in wait for the president at his golf course in West Palm Beach. Just get it all out. Let us have the truth. The American people can deal with it. We need a cleansing in America. We need to start over with a new page and a clean slate. And let's return this country and allow us to regain the moral high ground. Well, I've been a pilot since I was 15. I have the very great pleasure and privilege to fly a jet aircraft. I also have a helicopter license. I've been on a lot of radio and television shows this week analyzing the tragedy that occurred over the Potomac River in the Washington Ronald Reagan National Airspace and the great tragedy that took, I believe, 64 lives, including 16 members of the U.S. skating team, people in the prime of their life with all the promise in front of them. It is a tragedy of epic proportion and one that we are all grieving for. I have been asked many times what my thoughts are, and very simply, there's a lot to look at. You have 2 very experienced pilots in the regional jet. You have two experienced pilots in the helicopter. There are conflicting reports about what the helicopter was doing in that spot where they were. Now, I did hear a retired general just yesterday on Fox being interviewed, and he explained those helicopters are being used by our government to keep the Capitol safe. Now, I fly in and around and through the busiest airspace in the country routinely. That would be the Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport. It's called Class Bravo airspace. There are very specific rules that you have to follow when flying through Class Bravo airspace, including a clearance from the air traffic control facility responsible for that sector that you're going to be entering. And the airspace typically goes from the ground all the way up to 10 and 12,000 feet. So it is inconceivable to me that that Black Hawk helicopter would have been in the Reagan National Airspace, without a clearance. And I'm pretty sure that that clearance probably would have been issued by the tower. And I'm thinking that the helicopter was in communication with the tower. It gets further complicated, however, because the American Airlines flight was on approach to Reagan National. And in that phase of the flight, you're talking to a different controller. You're talking to the approach controller, who is in a building somewhere with no windows looking at a radar screen. The tower operator is, as you know, several hundred feet in the air with 360-degree visibility, and they use binoculars and very high-powered instruments so that they can improve their vision. And this was a crystal clear night. So the tower operator should have been able to see both the helicopter and the American Airlines flight. There was confusion over the American Airlines aircraft. The Black Hawk pilots, whatever controller they were talking to, called the regional aircraft out to the pilots. Well, as fate would have it, there were two regional aircraft. The pilots apparently reported seeing one of the regional flights in sight, which is typically the jargon. They'll call out the target, they'll tell you where it is, and you just respond in sight, or no joy, meaning I don't see them. No contact is another expression. But they said they had the aircraft. Well, the conventional wisdom is that they were looking at the other regional flight, not the American Airlines aircraft. And so there was a horrible collision. There's a lot of focus on the altitude that the helicopter was at. The American Airlines flight was absolutely at the correct air altitude. When you're on approach, even in visual conditions like Reagan National that night, a couple of things bear note. One is, even on an instrument flight plan in visual conditions, we have this requirement that you see and avoid. And that would apply to both the Black Hawk pilots and the regional jet. So that's a question mark. Why did 4 pilots, none of them, see the other aircraft? My guess is that my suspicion is, without evidence, is that Black Hawk was on some kind of a mission. And that's not atypical. I hear police helicopters routinely, when I'm flying in and around Hartsfield, reporting in saying, I'm 3 miles north of the center line, or I'm 2 miles south of the center line, conducting surveillance at 500 feet. And the controller will reply, don't get no closer than 2 miles south of the center line, or wherever the position is. And so the helicopter pilot knows to stay there. Now, it's pretty unusual that they would have put this helicopter on the final approach course for the runway. That's what's the head scratcher that nobody can figure out. And even still, why none of the pilots saw the other, And my suspicion is that those pilots in the Black Hawk helicopter became distracted. That whatever they were doing, they were looking at something that distracted them from flying the helicopter. And that's the number one rule of aviation. Aviate, navigate, communicate. In that order. You fly the aircraft first and foremost. But there's also this thing called cockpit resource management. And so very often you will, just human nature being what it is, when two pilots are in an airplane and they're both at the controls, one is designated as the pilot in command. We would call that the captain of the ship. And he has the primary responsibility for flying that airplane. The other pilot may be assigned duties relating to working the radios, or if they were on a surveillance mission, maybe participating in the surveillance. I believe that there was a third crew member on the helicopter. They may have been involved in the surveillance, and maybe they saw something that was startling or alerted them. And it wouldn't have required them to have taken their eye off the ball, but for a few seconds to have resulted in a tragedy. That's my sheer unmitigated guess of what happened with the Black Hawk pilots. The American pilots are a little more confusing. I think we're going to have to find the black boxes. I'm sure that the NTSB, who has responsibility for investigating the accident, already has all the radar tracks and all the recorded communications between both aircraft and whatever agency or rather whatever controller was assigned to them. Now, there is a lot of concern about their one controller being responsible for working two positions that night. That is not terribly unusual, but it is unusual in periods of time when you have a lot of traffic. And certainly at 8 p.m. at night, 9 p.m. at night is a time that a lot of airplanes are arriving and departing, particularly at hub airports that Reagan National would fall into the category of. So there's a lot of work to be done to dissect this and to come up with what occurred. I do and have been vocal, and I will say it here. I am a Trump loyalist. I have been consistently since 2015, when I first heard he was thinking about running for president. I said, that is a great idea. This is a candidate that is going to really make a splash. And I think my prediction is held true. I voted for him in 2016, I voted for him in 2020, and I voted for him again in 2024. That does not mean that he is immune from scrutiny. And I was taken aback when he chose to go to the DEI in the moments after the tragedy. I felt that that was inappropriate and misplaced. That could have been reserved for later. We have no evidence that anybody on any of the flights or at the control, in the control booths, the control positions, were the result of a DEI hire. Maybe the president knows something that we don't know, though. We'll have to stay tuned, and that will certainly be part of the analysis. Right now, I think that we need to give the family time to grieve and to give them some space. And I think we need to take a breath, allow the investigators to do their work. And then when we have the facts, we know what happened, then we can start making plans to provide that this never happens again. I'm sure that new rules and regulations will result from this, and that will improve the safety of general aviation and commercial flight even more. And it has already, up until this tragedy, been one of the safest means of transportation that there is. So it is a tragedy. My heart goes out to the families of the loved ones that they lost. And we'll leave it at that. We've got a good show ahead for you today. Stay tuned. We come to you every Saturday on the John Fredericks Radio Network in Memphis, Atlanta, Nashville, Richmond, Norfolk, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Morgantown, West Virginia. We're also on the CDM Press. They have 13 digital platforms on the World Wide Web. We simulcast on CDM Press. You can go find us there on Rumble and Getter. And we also simulcast on the John Fredericks channel on Getter. You can listen on Rumble to The Truth with John Gordon and on YouTube Live as well. So I hope you'll come and find us, subscribe and like to the channel. If you do, share our broadcast if you like it and you think other people might enjoy it. We welcome you here every Saturday between the hours of 12 and 2 and on Sundays between 1 and 3. And we're, of course, all of our past shows are on rumble.com. Just look for John Gordon Truth. They're all right there and you can go and enjoy them. All right, stay tuned now as we begin our first interview. Thanks for joining us today. The World Economic Forum just concluded their annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland this week. And there are a lot of people who have many concerns and questions about the World Economic Forum and their intent. Here to help us unpack it all is Mark Gober. He is an author located in Southern California. He has written An End to the Upside Down Reset, the leftist vision for society under the Great Reset, and how it can be fool-carrying people into supporting harmful causes. How it can fool caring people. That's a mouthful. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, John. Yeah, the main title of the book is just An End to the Upside Down Reset, and you read the full thing with the subtitle.
Yes.
So thank you.
So what motivated you to write this book? And I understand it's one of 7, a series?
Yes. Yes. So the first books that I wrote were more, let's just say, metaphysical. Who are we and why are we here? What's the science behind our existence? And then 2020 hit. And I became much more interested in following the political narratives, especially everything happening with COVID. And then in the summer of 2020, very powerful people announced the Great Reset. This was Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, then Prince Charles, John Kerry. And then also there was a book written by Klaus Schwab and one of his colleagues called COVID-19, The Great Reset. So my point here is there was an explicit vision for society laid out. And what the people who conceived this idea were saying was, yes, COVID is a tragic thing, but it's an opportunity to reshape our world. These were explicit statements. It wasn't conspiracy theory. Anyone could read the book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. So I realized that there was a lot more at play than I had realized, and it made me look much more closely at politics, socioeconomic issues, and just trying to understand the forces that seem to be directing the world and how they're competing. And I realized that this Great Reset vision was not just a short-term vision. And it's probably been something going on for a long time under different names. And it's something that will persist in the future. And just to summarize how I see it, and there's much more detail in the book, this is a battle, if you will, of freedom versus authoritarianism. Those who believe that humans should make decisions on their own versus others who believe that humans should be controlled, that they're sort of parasitic entities on the planet that shouldn't be prosperous, and that they should offload their authority to the experts who will try to keep them safe. And I favored much more the freedom-oriented outlook, and therefore I thought it was important to lay out and just let people know this is what's explicitly being stated by some very powerful people. We should be aware of it.
It's really kind of scary. And, gives a lot of fodder to conspiratorialists. Steve Bannon says there are no conspiracies, but there sure are a lot of coincidences. And so you take the Great Reset and the book that you described or that you related that Klaus Schwab authored. And, it's interesting to me that in the United States and on the world stage, that when explanations of events start to be revealed, that there seems almost to be a process to get to the truth, but it's very slow in coming and it evolves rather than being told. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the COVID-19 virus. And we were told that it originated in a bat cave 2 hours from Wuhan. Then there was a scientist at the Wuhan laboratory. It was a lady, as I recall, who said, no, we were working on coronaviruses in the lab, and it was released. She did not say whether by accident. And that lady has never been seen or heard of since. Now, I do know that that is factual. So it gives rise to people's concerns and deepest fears, which then lead to conspiracy theories. And if you have noticed, just this week, there has been a refocus on the release of the coronavirus. And we are now being told that, oh, yes, we know factually 100% certain that it came from the Wuhan lab. I don't understand why they don't say, and we don't know whether it was intentional or unintentional. They're leaving the impression that it was unintentional. But it came from a government that we don't trust for good reason. They don't care about human life. They have committed genocide against their own people. And we know that they want to take over the world by 2050 because they've told us so. And then you have the World Economic Forum, which is a combination of some of the largest companies in the world, most of them from the United States. And you couple that with the fact that Larry Fink, who is a member of the World Economic Forum and is the CEO or the chairman of BlackRock, who says that the Chinese form of government may be a better form of government than our government in the United States. You look at it and you say, whoa, what are these people up to and what is it about? So tell me, just straight out, was the COVID-19 virus an unintentional release from the lab or was it intentional? What do you think?
Well, first, John, I want to just add on to what you said about this pattern of information release before I get to SARS-CoV-2, because you raise a really important point that the media will tell us one thing from the experts and we're supposed to just believe it. And then the narrative will change and they don't admit that they were wrong. And maybe they'll say, oh, that's the process of science. But each step along the way, we are expected to believe exactly what we're told by the mainstream press and even politicians. And if you ask a question, you're a conspiracy theorist, which is quite ironic because the scientific process is inherently one of asking questions. Now, with regard to this lab leak theory that we've been hearing about much more as a credible idea. Recently, in the beginning of COVID, this was a conspiracy theory. You're actually touching on something I discussed in my sixth book. It's called An End to Upside Down Medicine. And I have I exposed some controversial theories on this one, which I was not aware of until pretty recently. But there are questions about the notion of a virus and how virology even works. And we're all expected to believe that what happens in these labs and with people working with test tubes, that they are telling us exactly how it all works. But there's a woman in Canada named Christine Massey, who has worked with colleagues all over the world to file freedom of information requests. So these are requests that anyone can submit to ask government agencies about anything. And what she's been asking with her colleagues is whether the virus, SARS-CoV-2, has been properly isolated. And that's an important thing because you need to have an independent variable in a scientific study. It's a very basic thing. If you want to test something to see what its effect is, you have to introduce that thing, the independent variable, and see what happens to the study. The problem is that these freedom of information requests, and she submitted them with her colleagues to over 200 institutions in 40 countries, including the CDC and others, saying, can you show me a purified sample of just the SARS-CoV-2 virus without other stuff in it? And repeatedly, they say, we don't have that. So we run into real problems with trying to understand what's actually going on in these labs. And was there a virus in the way that it's been told to us, or is it more complex? And that's a narrative we don't hear as much in the mainstream press because I know it introduces a lot of wrinkles, but I've spent a lot of time reading these freedom of information requests and seeing what the CDC and others say. They say, we have no records. Every time we have no records of a purified sample of just this virus, which raises a lot of questions because if you don't have just a sample of the virus by itself, how can you run a genetic sequencing of just a virus? How can you run a test? And we know the tests have been imperfect. Sometimes you get false positives and so forth. So I think there are layers of questioning that we might hear about in the future.
Well, giving more ammunition, putting more fuel on the fire, Joe Biden on his way out of the White House in just the very last moments of his miserable administration, provided pardons to a number of people. First of all of his family members, and then members of the J6 Commission and Anthony Fauci. Now, what necessitated a pardon of Anthony Fauci unless he violated the laws of the United States of America and the sovereign states? Which laws would he have violated?
It's a great question. And then on the other side of the spectrum, people will say, well, Fauci did such a good job, and therefore we know that his political opponents will attack him, and it's a good thing that Joe Biden pardoned him because we're saving an American hero. That's the alternative narrative we hear. But there were hearings that anyone could watch where Dr. Fauci was being questioned, and it seemed that his answers contradicted what came up in emails where he was clearly coordinating with other officials. So you raise a great point, John. What might have been hidden? And why would he need to be pardoned?
So what do we know about Anthony Fauci? We know that he is a serial liar. That makes me suspicious. He told us that masking was absolutely required, and it was proven by science to stop the spread of the COVID virus. We know that he lied to us about social distancing. He said that 6 feet was scientifically proven to prevent the spread of the airborne particles that could infect another human being in a public setting. We now know that while he was telling us that there were memorandum that he was had either authored or was in the chain of and possessed the information that said there was no evidence that supported either of those things. We also know that he is the one who told us that the virus came from a bat cave 2 hours away from Wuhan, and that we subsequently learned that that was a lie. And while he was lying to us, we learned that his Department of Government was funding the Wuhan laboratory. Now, I think he has got a tremendous amount of explaining to do. Now, you couple that with the then head of the CDC, who my instinct tells me is a very honest person and genuine individual, was intentionally excluded from meetings that related at the highest levels in our federal government that relating to the COVID virus and the vaccine, because he wasn't buying the narrative. So what did they do? They froze him out. You put it all together, something's not right. One hypothesis is that this was part of some grand plan to further China's domination of the world, and that the World Economic Forum was somehow complicit. As I'm saying the words that sound so outlandish that it couldn't possibly be true, surely I must be furthering conspiracy theories. But when you look at all of the evidence and you look at all the secretiveness that surrounded these conversations. I mean, if you were the head, the most senior member of our government dealing with this, why would you not want the American people to know the truth? Mm-hmm. And why would you lie to them? And why would you cover up the fact that your department had funded, I don't remember the number, 50 million, 150 million, I can't remember, of the Wuhan laboratory. It just smells to high heaven.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the biggest red flag of all of this is the lack of transparency. If there were nothing to hide and the world is going to be shut down on the basis of fear of a virus, why not tell people the full history? Why does it have to be hidden? Why do we have to just wait to see that certain documents are revealed? And why on the mainstream press do we not hear the set of basic facts that you just laid out? I think the reason that what you said sounds so outlandish is because it's not coming from the mainstream press, but it could. And it's really pointing to the need for critical thinking.
Well, how to tame an out of control, dishonest media is a question that we need to delve into. I don't know what the right answer is because I'm a fervent believer in freedom of speech, and that certainly extends to members of the media. But I think that there should be a process of accountability when it can be proven that a member of the media has intentionally lied. I don't know how you then police that and not somehow interfere with freedom of speech. My paradigm has been that the public will self-regulate dishonest brokers. That's what I would prefer to see happen. And I think that we are actually seeing it happen right before our very eyes. CNN's viewership has gone from a high of 3 million viewers to a low of just a few 100,000. I am told that Dan Bongino, who is a podcaster, has more viewers than CNN. And certainly Joe Rogan does. And so I think that is the public regulating dishonesty in the media. We just need more of it, and I think it needs to be even more punitive right now. But what do you make of President Trump's first 7 days in office? Have you ever in your entire life seen anything like it?
Wow, well, a lot has certainly happened in a short amount of time. I'm just thinking about where we are today versus 6 months ago.
How about a week ago?
Even a week ago. The acceleration is quite incredible. And it depends on who you ask. If you turn on CNN or read the New York Times, you're going to see a lot of panic. But if you look at those who have been asking questions for a while, this is really some positive momentum. I mean, when Trump was speaking at the World Economic Forum's annual event, Davos, he wasn't there in person, but he did a recorded event that anyone can watch. He said so many things that really counter the World Economic Forum's narrative. For one, he talked about this notion of disinformation and how he doesn't want the government intervening and how he wants people to decide for themselves. I mean, that is in direct contrast to what the WEF has said about what they call a raging problem of disinformation, meaning that they want to control the narrative. So I think that what is happening now is a real shakeup, because whether people agree with Trump's opinions or not, he's exposing ideas that were not being broadcasted on the mainstream press. And now they're having no choice but to expose what he's saying, and the results will speak for themselves.
So did you see also, I think it was the president of Argentina, Javier Milei. Did I pronounce his name right?
Yeah, I believe it's Milei.
Milei. Did you see his address to the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, I saw parts of it, and he has quite a libertarian mentality out of Argentina. He's endorsed, for example, very much free market economic principles like the work of Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian School of Economics. He's another one who is really countering the World Economic Forum's narrative. And what's incredible to me, given where we've been with so much censorship, is that these voices are being platformed on stages where there's a lot of disagreement. And I think that's a very positive development.
Well, I thought that I watched him. I thought that I had several thoughts, actually. One, I thought he was a tremendous communicator. And everything that he said was so diplomatic. To me, I thought he was more Trump than Trump, because he had the Trump mentality and policy perspective without the sting. But he put it right in their eye. And you couldn't get mad at him because he was so polite while he was doing it. But he seemed to contradict everything the World Economic Forum say that they stand for. And he did it so eloquently. I just felt like he was a breath of fresh air. If any of our listeners know how to contact him, I will name you an associate producer of The Truth if you can get him on our show. I got to get this program big enough that he'll come on here. He was one of the most liberating voices I have heard. But just in a week, President Trump has started to round up rapists, murderers, robbers, and deport them. He is taming the world when it comes to pushing back on his agenda. He sent 2 plane loads to Colombia. They wouldn't allow the planes to land. And Trump said, fine, we're going to tariff you to oblivion, 25% starting February the 1st. And by the way, every single member of your diplomatic delegation is going to be sent home. We are going to provide extra special scrutiny of anyone from Colombia coming into America. And this is tantamount to war. He didn't say that. Those are my words, but that is certainly his reaction. And the president of Colombia issued a press release saying, well, we're going to tariff you back 25%. And that lasted about 30 minutes. And he retracted that and said, oh, no, really, you can land your planes here. And by the way, I'll even loan you one of our military planes to bring these people back. I mean, it's like that girl in The Exorcist with her head spinning around. I felt like I was watching the most unbelievable turn of events that I've seen in diplomatic circles for a long time.
Well, we're seeing Trump and the administration playing hardball, and it's something we had not seen in the last 4 years. So I do wonder if some of the talk of tariffs is posturing, and we'll see how it goes. But it clearly worked in one circumstance, and an ability to say we're not going to be pushed around is a new kind of mentality. And it's also a highly nationalist mentality, which is in direct contrast to the globalist mentality of the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset, wanting to consolidate power and having a few people make decisions for everybody. Whereas we're seeing much more nationalistic rhetoric from Trump and some others.
Well, it is so liberating, and his notion of an external Department of Revenue is so exciting because people have gotten a free ride off of this country and have taken full economic advantage of us for decades. I have a friend who's pretty high in the pecking order, and he asked a member of George Bush's cabinet why we were favoring our enemies in our foreign aid. And they responded that, well, you have to understand the delicacies of diplomatic relations and the nuances of foreign relations. And he told me that, and I thought, are you out of your mind? We're going to reward our enemies, and you call that nuanced foreign relations? It is a false expectation. And I think it is in all walks of life, frankly. And I've seen it. I'm 71 years old. I've seen it all. All of us want to be benevolent. Everybody wants to be charitable. Everybody wants to be virtuous. Unfortunately, it usually backfires. I've seen it in parents who try to spoil their children, thinking that it is going, especially, and I don't want to get out on too thin ice here, and I don't want to step on toes, but I'm lucky. I found a good one. But that's not always the case in marriages. And I've observed, I think it's pretty commonly accepted that in divorce, one parent, if not both, will try and incur the favor of the child or children by enriching them, by giving them things, buying them clothes, relaxing discipline. And they think that that's going to make the child love them more than their estranged spouse. I have observed that the opposite occurs. The Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. The point is, children crave discipline. And no one wants to be the heavy. Nobody wants to be the disciplinarian. But isn't it strange that the child gravitates towards the parent who applies the discipline? Because innately, we know that it's the right thing. We know that the parent loves us when they discipline us because they want us to grow up in a right way. That's my paradigm. Now, our callers can check in with us, 804-778-8888. I'm happy to have that conversation with anybody who would like to debate that today. I would do so out of intellectual curiosity, not to maintain my dogma. But I guess my point is, I think it works in world relations. I think it works in domestic policy. Newt Gingrich told me 35 years ago that the social welfare system was the most destructive thing that we could do in America because recipients go to the welfare office to collect their check. They stand in line for hours waiting to get to the front of the line, and they're greeted by someone who is respectful and surly. They collect their check, they leave, and what happens? Are they grateful? Do they say, oh, thank you so much? No, they're ungrateful, and resentful. And they only want more, thinking they're deserving of more. Okay, so I got off on a bit of a tangent here. It applies in foreign relations too. You cannot buy allegiance. And that's what the Biden administration has tried to do. And who knows what else they've done. We know that Biden took money from companies tied to the CCP. And then what happens? Our Department of Defense tracks a spy balloon all the way from China across the Pacific, entering into Canada and then dipping down into the United States and lingering over our most sensitive nuclear bases for days, only traverse and exit the country in South Carolina when Biden so courageously ordered that it be shot down after the mission is complete and the data has been fed back to the CCP and the Chinese government. Does he really think that we're that big of idiots that we cannot see through that? And what's going on? What is going on?
Well, I want to touch on a theme that hopefully covers many of the things you just eloquently pointed out there, which is this weaponization of compassion.
Yeah.
Where you have people, they say, oh, we're doing this to protect you. And they use very flowery language. If you read the book, COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and his colleague, it doesn't sound authoritarian on the surface. It's all about making the world a better place. But the question is this a wolf in sheep's clothing? And that's what people need to start asking more and more, that their deception is a real thing. Just because something sounds benevolent and compassionate doesn't mean that's going to be the consequence of it. And we see this especially on the left. This has actually to do with political psychology. People on the left are more influenced by compassion or by compassionate sounding things. And they might then ignore the ways in which a policy might not actually be compassionate in other ways. They'll just see the surface level aspects of it. And really what we all need to be doing is looking at the layers, not just what it sounds like, but what actually the impact is. And as people say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
But I don't think they're good intentions. I'm sorry. I know that you and I aren't debating that. But
yeah.
When Joe Biden opens our southern borders and invites rapists, robbers, murderers, drug dealers, the cartel, people who engaged in child trafficking, I'm told that it is a huge, beyond your wildest imagination, industry representing billions upon billions of dollars. And he's inviting these people into our country. I don't believe that it is compassion. It's certainly not compassionate for the citizens of this country. It's certainly not compassionate for Laken Riley and her parents and family. And it's certainly not compassionate for the veterans that I met on the streets of New York just outside of the Roosevelt Hotel who had no clothing, no shelter, no food. Meanwhile, we're enriching these people from foreign countries that came here illegally and giving them a luxurious place to live, a daily stipend, food, and a motorcycle that they could check out like a library book and tour Manhattan. I mean, this is insanity. This is not, you cannot rationalize that on any compassionate basis. There has to be a bad motive intended, because if it was compassionate, we'd take care of those homeless veterans on the streets of New York who I interviewed for this show and met, and my heart bled for them. And they couldn't understand it, and I can't understand it. There is no compassion there.
It's a great point. The distinction here is the appearance of compassion versus real compassion. And these policies are often masked as being compassionate, as, oh, we just want to be friendly and allow people in, and look how much these people are helping our country and so forth. And if we deport them, we're not being compassionate because they're helping our society, whereas they're ignoring that certain criminals have been let in and have led to great damage, for example. So it's this showing one side of the story and not ignoring the ways in which a policy is completely the opposite of compassionate. And this is important because we don't hear that from the mainstream press. We only see one side of the story, and then the people who actually do want to be compassionate are being framed as somehow authoritarian. They flip and invert the script.
Well, I would just, wonder who in the Biden administration would Joe Biden and Dr. Jill, would Mayorkas, would Fauci, would Merrick Garland, like, if they want to be compassionate, would they invite these people into their home for dinner or to spend a long weekend? Yet they'll bring them into the country and deposit them into the heartland of America. And we just had an ICE officer shot and killed in New Hampshire, Connecticut, somewhere in the Northeast this very week from an illegal who came across the northern border. So it's not just the southern border, it's the northern border as well that we have to protect. But there's no compassion here. It is a fiction. It is a lie for political and possibly economic gain. And I am incensed by it, and every American should be incensed by it. And we owe such a debt of gratitude to Donald Trump. But what we owe him, every single American, Republican, Democrat, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, I don't care. What we owe Donald Trump is our support. This is not a partisan issue. It is a common sense issue of right and wrong. And if people are so compassionate, and if that is truly their motivation, join the Peace Corps and go to South America and help these people. Or take your savings and send it to the Red Cross in Guatemala and Mexico and these impoverished countries in South America. You have an opportunity to make your own decisions freely and independently. And if there's enough people that feel that way, then they can have a tremendous impact. But don't bring drug dealers, people who engage in child trafficking, who are willing to murder, rape, and rob, and put them in our country. It is absurd. And it is a lie. It is a lie masquerading as virtue. And there's no virtue. It is purely for political power. And we've seen it. And we thought it was just Joe Biden. We thought it was just Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But now, the more we get into the weeds on it, we see the guy from Illinois who wants to be president. He's a heir of the Hyatt hotels, Pritzker, going on television yesterday saying how inhumane this is, that Donald Trump is rounding up all these people and sending them home. Is it inhumane to send people who engage in violent behavior, who came here illegally to our country and have brought huge, overwhelming grief to our own citizens who live next door to these people? Where is the humaneness in that? It's just, and Gavin Newsom, and the governor of Colorado, we're going to obstruct Trump from sending these people back. And they're the people in Aurora, California, who've got members of a gang, the most dangerous gang in the world, who have commandeered apartment buildings and displaced their own citizens, and who have now assaulted police officers who've come to round them up to send them home. I've never seen anything like it in my 71 years.
What seems to have happened here is a level of brainwashing that's really hard to wrap our minds around, because there is such hatred for Trump that people are unable to see anything beyond what the mainstream press headlines are, because they're so conditioned to think that everything he's going to do is going to counter compassion, that it's impossible that his policies could be actually compassionate in some way. And the media is so biased, and so is academia. And so the younger generations have been are growing up with this incredible left-wing bias. It's something I cover in my book, An End to the Upside Down Reset, from all angles, whether it's academia or the mainstream television or the newspapers or the technology industry. We hear one side of the story, and you really have to depart from that to hear the narrative that you laid out so well, that if you want to be compassionate, it's the opposite of many of these left-wing policies that have come in. But unfortunately, and I can say this from my own personal experience, because I come from the mainstream world. For my undergrad, I went to Princeton. I worked in investment banking in New York. I worked in Silicon Valley for about 10 years. So I know a lot of people who are incredibly intelligent intellectually, but who buy into the mainstream narratives because it's all they've been fed. And it's like a form of mind control and hypnosis.
I'm so glad you volunteered your background, because I was sitting here wondering, how does someone who is obviously well-educated and a millennial, I believe, living in California, and now you're telling me that you lived in Silicon Valley, how do you maintain such a tremendous moral compass?
I've just been guided by the truth. That's been my goal since I started writing books, because I was just working in Silicon Valley in the business world, and I got hold of some scientific evidence that challenged my own paradigms. And so I've had a compass that says, I want to know the truth and I want to act with integrity. That's been my goal. And it's been really challenging, as you and many members of your audience know, because there's such divisiveness. And if you say certain things, people will call you names. But I think the truth ultimately will come out, and we just have to remain steadfast.
We had Charlie Kirk on just a couple of months ago, and we had this very conversation, and he and I totally agreed. Call me sexist, call me racist, call me misogynist, call me homophobic, call me anything you want to call me. But I am going to tell you the truth as I know it. Yeah. And if that offends your political sensitivities, if that is politically incorrect, and you want to retaliate by calling me a name rather than defending your position, then I say that's on them. And I'm okay with it. You know, they can call me anything they want to, but I'm like you, Mark, and it's so refreshing to hear you say that you were inspired to write your books because of your quest for the truth. Why can every single living American not resolve that is going to be our singular common denominator, that we are all going to join hands and take a blood oath that we are going to be guided by the truth? How can an organized society work under any other premise?
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I'm doing this, and I'm glad that you're stating this publicly, because I think when people hear this kind of mentality, it ignites something within us that. Sure, that's why we're here. We're here to be guided by the truth. How could we live in a world of falsehoods? But at the same time, John, I can say from personal experience, it was not so easy, because there were two sides pulling at me, the side that wanted to express the truth, and then the side of me that said, what are going to be the consequences of this? And I've had to do this on multiple levels, because let's say my first few books were not political. And when I wrote my first political book called An End to Upside Down Liberty, and then this other one, An End to the Upside Down Reset, I knew that I would lose some supporters, people that might have agreed with other parts of what I said, but now they're going to say, Mark went off the deep end. Really a shame that Mark's gone in this direction. And that has happened, but I've had to do like what you discussed with Charlie Kirk. It's on them, and I can't control them. It's their journey. And you know what's happened, John, is that when I take these risks, I end up getting exposed to new people and new audiences that really resonate with me that I wouldn't have found if I stayed in my lane before.
Well, maybe you are establishing yourself as a leader, and a leader is willing to take risk and is willing to sacrifice personally in order to assert the truth and take the moral high ground. So I will tell you, Mark, it has been my pleasure and honor to have you on The Truth today. And I hope that you will come back soon and often. Before you leave, how long did it take you to write 7 books?
Well, first of all, John, I want to thank you for all that you do. Thank you for having me on the show. My first book was written in 2017 and published in 2018. And the last book was published in 2024, the 7th one in the series. So it's been rapid fire. I've gone all in. I left my job. I was a partner at my firm in Silicon Valley and had to leave because I wanted to focus on this stuff full time. But I think for me personally, it's the most impactful thing I can do to try to learn as much as possible and share it and synthesize it with people. And it's whether it's politics or medicine, talking about viruses or cosmology or the nature of reality. I think we live in such an inverted world that basic truths have been omitted, and we've got to get back to living in alignment with reality.
100%. Now, just mechanically, I'm curious, how do you go about researching and writing your books? How do you search for the truth?
Typically what happens is that I will just learn of something by listening to podcasts or watching social media or reading books, and it will start a thread where then I learn of other sources, and I just follow it where it leads. Often I don't know where it's going to lead me. And then I get to a point after having spent a lot of time on various subjects where a framework emerges and I say, wow, actually, there's a new paradigm here. Like with the Great Reset. Oh, people don't understand what the Great Reset is. Let me synthesize what these people are saying and show that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, that it's not actually compassionate, and how people can be fooled. So it's a process that feels like it's guided, I don't know, by my intuition. And at the end, I realize what I've learned about along the way, whether it's political or otherwise. So for me, it's just following threads. And also, it's really important to look at all sides. I like to look at what resonates with me, but then I like to see what the critics say, or even people I don't agree with. And that leads me with a framework where I can present both sides, and I try to do it objectively, but hopefully readers will see that there is a let's say, a clear path that seems more true than another one.
I think that is incredibly well spoken, and I thank you for that. And so where do we buy your book? And if we want to keep in touch and keep up with what you're doing, where do we find you?
My website is a good place to start. It's markgober.com, markgober.com. And I'm on social media on X, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Mark Gober, author. All of my books are available on Amazon in hard copy, Kindle, and Audible formats. And I narrate the Audible for all my books.
I hope you're getting rich and that you've been able to replace that cush job that you left in Silicon Valley.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's been quite the opposite. Book writing is a tough business, but I didn't get into it for the business part of it. I wanted to just do what I thought was right, and we'll see how long I can sustain myself. But this is what I enjoy. I like expressing these ideas because actually, when I first started, podcasts were what ignited the fire for me. They were the first dominoes.
Mark Gober, ladies and gentlemen, and into the upside down reset. He has restored my hope for our country and our future because he is a great leader of the next generation. We're going to be hearing a lot more out of you, Mark Gober, and I hope you will accept my friend request that I'm going to send you later today on Facebook.
Absolutely. Would be honored. Thank you, John.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate
MarkGober.com, everybody, and Amazon, Kindle, and Audible if you want to get his books. And that's The Truth. And I'm John Gordon.
The Truth with John Gordon.
I woke up on top of the world this morning.
We break down today's political landscape and feature interviews with key guests.
It doesn't matter if they call you a or a
to uncover the real story behind current events in the United States.
Of course, saw a rifle pointing through a fence with a chain link. Okay, so
you're a good man. I just want to give you a compliment because you have courage to stay with the truth.
I hate injustice.
This is great fun. I like you and your ideas, so let's do some more of this.
Donald Trump has only been president of the United States for 2 weeks, and just look at the things that have occurred. For one, one of the first, well, I think it was the first trip that he made out of Washington just 5 days into his presidency was to go visit North Carolina, a subject that we've covered here on The Truth. And to help us sort it out, we have Shilo Creed. Shilo is an author and a resident of North Carolina. Her husband just made a trip to Ground Zero. Shilo, welcome to The Truth, and we appreciate your coming on. What did your husband find when he went to Ground Zero in North Carolina?
It was an interesting trip for him, definitely. We have done a lot of hurricane cleanup, mostly in Florida over the years. So we have some, hands-on experience, feeling what the people are feeling when you're there actually working to help clean things up. It changes your perception of what it means to have come through a hurricane. So when he went out there, I believe it was a week and a half ago, he was shocked to see just that so little progress has been made and that people are still really suffering. They're, living in tents in really cold weather. And the terrain is really tough out there because, my husband has driven these big trucks for years, and he honestly said, I would not want to have that responsibility of driving my big, heavy truck up and down those muddy, steep grades. He said, it is really just a tough place. So there's a lot of factors that go into fixing the hurricane damage from North Carolina, and a lot of them are physical. It just makes it very difficult. Yeah.
It's been months. And I haven't heard a single person say that they think the response has been adequate. And it's so sad. People literally lost their homes, just swept off the foundation and dragged downstream by torrents of water. And FEMA, which is supposed to go in and provide rapid response and relief for people, seems to have been woefully deficient. Have you heard those things from people living there?
We're about 3 or 4 hours from, the hardest hit areas. And my husband actually went to go and help. And he was actually turned away. And we've had a lot of other people who had machinery, equipment. I'll bring my skid steer, I'll bring my chainsaws. I just want to go and help these people actually get turned back by law enforcement, by barricades. It's just an extremely odd.
Why would they do that? I mean, that people are suffering and people are coming with aid and they're being turned away. What sense can you make of that?
It's really difficult to untangle, and at that point, it definitely was all under the Biden administration. To me, a lot of things going on in the country then didn't make sense, and this was certainly one of them. It's very difficult to see, a government send billions overseas in aid, and then when our countrymen, are in real need, to send so little and to do so little, and then to keep people out. And that was really something we heard from at least 9 or 10, different people that we've talked to in the area, and they were all of them turned away. We even knew some landowners who said, I have a second home there, and I wanted to go in and see if anything was left, and I couldn't. They would not allow me in. So it's very unusual, for sure.
It just seems like fascism to me. We've got the power, you don't. You lost your home, tough.
And then you have all of the lithium deposits that are under that area that make you question, was this a land grab? What is really going on here? What's at the heart of trying to get these people out of their homes?
Well, I wonder that too, but I've heard other people express that concern, but you can't really create a hurricane, can you?
I don't know. Have you looked into the HARP weather programs?
I have heard about it. I guess I am open to receiving information on just about anything that our federal government does or does not do. There is a really compelling video from a YouTuber on the fires in LA. And he is not pushing the notion, but he is putting it out there that there was some weather phenomenon that started in Nevada and made its way to California. But the fact of the matter is, my son lives in LA, and he and I have spoken about it. And he says, but Dad, you can't create Santa Ana winds. And I said, no, that's true. I don't think you can. And I know that there are people that think that the government is tinkering with our weather, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that every January and February, the Santa Ana winds are going to be present in Southern California. So you could just time your evilness to coincide with that. And this video, it's Wolves in Finance, is a guy that I really watch a lot. He's a little out there. He's a little more out there than I am. But he puts out some really good content. And one of the things that he did show is that 4 fires started simultaneously in different parts of the city. Now, that's hard to imagine that it would have happened naturally. And you look at the value of the land that is there. Oh my gosh. And you're saying the same thing in North Carolina about the lithium deposits. I mean, are there people that are that heartless and callous that they would really allow people's lives to be shattered and decimated just for their own greed so they could get to have ownership over the lithium? Do you think?
I don't know. I hope not. I don't want to believe that. I saw a video, about 2 weeks ago of Gavin Newsom talking about the Palisades area, saying that his plan was to turn it into, high-rise apartments, sort of 15-minute cities. And he literally said at the end of the video, the only thing standing in the way of our plans for Palisades is all the homes. And this was a year or two ago, I believe, that he gave that interview. So
and part of that Wolves in Finance video, and I would commend it to our viewers and our listeners. Our listeners, by the way, are in Memphis, Nashville, Atlanta, Richmond, Norfolk, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Morgantown, West Virginia on the John Fredericks Radio Network. You can also catch us on CDM Press. They have 13 digital platforms on the World Wide Web. They care about the same thing we do, which is the truth. We're also on Rumble, Getter, YouTube, and X. So if you go to one of those sites and subscribe and like us, I'll be your new best friend. Okay, back to the program. So, North Carolina, these people, their lives have been shattered and decimated, and FEMA is nowhere. But Trump, in the 5th day of his administration, flies to North Carolina. And did you watch his presence there? Did you observe what he did and said?
I did as much as I was able to, and I did really was moved by a few interviews of just Americans who are in the thick of it. They've lost everything on their farm, and talking about what President Trump and what it said and what it meant to them was that was, I think, particularly moving, maybe even more so than what the president himself said, was people's reaction to it and how much it meant that he was there and that he cares. So.
Well, I think our government has just completely lost their mind. This notion that the government would tell people they can't return to their homes, that they would tell people they can't bring their skid steer in to help in the recovery effort is just nonsensical. If you're worried about liability, just have people sign a form. Have them sign a piece of paper, but let them in to let the cleanup begin, unless someone is hiding something. And of course, when this sort of stuff happens, that's the first thing that crosses our mind. Like, why would you not let somebody come in and do good? And I'm sure the bureaucrats are going to say, oh, well, they may injure our workers there. Well, so did the hurricane. Yeah, some things you just have to take a risk on, and those people own that property. The government doesn't own the property, and the people actually own the roads that are being rebuilt. The government doesn't own the roads. They're really just stewards over those roads. So I want to roll back the mentality of the bureaucrats in this country that think that they have unbridled power. The only reason they do is because people like you and I and good citizens have wanted to put our trust and faith in them and have not wanted to meddle or criticize them for fear that maybe we will demoralize somebody who's actually trying to do a good job. But that has given them a free rein to engage in the kind of recklessness that they have and continue to do. And I, for one, am sick of it. There used to be a notion in our culture called self-discipline. It seems to have gone out the window.
It does. It's actually a very scary place to be in our nation, especially with the younger generations growing up and really just having everything handed to them in a sense. And it doesn't make for strong people. Strong governments make weak people. And I think we're at that teetering point where Americans need to stand up. They need to start using some critical thinking. When they hear the news, when they listen to reports, they need to say, okay, I'm going to think about this. I'm not just going to swallow it. I'm going to make some decisions and I'm going to do some research. And then, I'll decide where the truth actually lies. And that's a big part of the strength of our nation is American men and women thinking for themselves, standing up for themselves, and standing up for especially what's right.
Shilo Creed, she's an author. She's from Western North Carolina. She joins us today on The Truth. And she has authored a book, which is actually the first of a trilogy, if I understand it correctly, entitled Plunged. Tell us about the book, Shilo.
Well, whenever someone picks the book up, I always tell them, brace yourself. It is an action-packed science fiction spiritual thriller. It has a lot of military themes, and the main character is forced into an experiment, which thrusts him into the spiritual side of our world, where he discovers that he isn't as strong as he thought he was, and he has a lot to learn in order to survive.
So I had the privilege last night of going to hear Eric Metaxas speak. Are you familiar with him?
I am, yeah.
That's one smart cookie. And he's written, I think, 12 New York Times best-selling books. And he has embarked on a study of the Bible and Christianity. And, there's always been this yin and yang between science and Christianity. And his thesis is that's not necessary, because the further you look into science, the more you become convicted that the science proves what's laid out in the Bible. And it's for one little factoid that I recall that he explained, that, the Earth is the only inhabited planet in our solar system. We believe it's the only intelligent life in the universe, our galaxy. And the Earth, had it been 3% smaller, or 3% larger on either end, we would not have been able to have had an atmosphere. And that water is one of the most unique natural resources found on Earth. And that Pluto, the largest planet in our universe, actually provides absolute balance in our solar system. And without Pluto, we would be subjected to a barrage of meteorites and asteroids plunging into the Earth. I sat there for an hour. I was spellbound listening to him. And his point is that it's all proven in science. And so the more you delve into the science, the more convicted you're going to become about that this was not, there may have been a Big Bang, but it was created and orchestrated by God.
Well, I can guarantee you that Jesus knew about quantum physics. Some of the statements that he made, Jesus Christ said, if you speak to the mountain and believe it in your heart, it will move. And when you start looking into quantum entanglement and other principles of quantum physics, you realize he is 100% correct. And like you said with water, it's two explosive, highly explosive gases combined together to make something that puts a fire out. So yeah, it's science. Definitely, the further we go, and especially the smaller we look at things, the atoms and quarks and neutrons and neutrinos, man, the more it proves the Bible is absolutely correct.
So where did you acquire your thirst for knowledge about the Bible and Christianity?
Oh, I grew up in a wonderful Christian home, and when I was 32, I had a massive heart issue for which, thank God, I received divine healing. So my commitment to the Lord has been lifelong, and was definitely solidified when I trusted Him completely for my actual life.
Well, so where did you grow up?
Oh, upstate New York, in the snow belt, in the frigid north.
So now you moved to the frigid south. It's
Oh,
cold
it
in North
has been.
Carolina, isn't it?
Today is beautiful, 65. So we're blessed to
wow.
be out of the cold spell.
Yeah, well, we had a little bit of cold spell in West Palm Beach, Florida. I think it got down all the
Oh,
way into the low 60s, maybe even 58, for God forbid. I had to put on a sweater, but we're back to Florida weather today as well. So one thing that Eric Metaxas said, and he's committed to come back on our show. We had him a couple of
awesome.
years ago, and I look forward to speaking with him soon. But I did not know this. You sound like you know a fair amount about science. That's not my wheelhouse. But I was told last night that there are actually 1 trillion galaxies. Is that possible?
Of course, it's possible. Absolutely. I think in the Old Testament, one of the prophets said that the Lord spreads out the universe like a scroll, and that statement has been proven that our galaxy, our whole universe is expanding. So it's amazing to see Scripture fulfilled by science.
So Eric Metaxas says that the placement of life on the earth was God's creation, which I believe, and it was intentional. That if there was a Big Bang, it was because God planned it that way, and that none of this would have happened by accident. That if you look at the way that the earth is constructed and the things that we depend on for life and the balance in the solar system, that it's all very precise and has to have been planned. So he is somewhat adamant that he thinks that believing that there is life in other parts of the universe is a fallacy. Do you have an opinion, or is there guidance in the Bible that will resolve this age-old question?
I personally haven't found anything in the Bible that relates specifically to that. I do believe that it's possible for governments and people who are in positions of power to use people's natural inclination to want to believe in extraterrestrial life, to have power over populations. We look back at COVID and say, look at the power grabs. Look at what happened to our population during that time. And if they could convince the world that there was an alien invasion, people would be very willing to hand over their freedoms in order for some form of protection. So I do think that there are a lot of political angles there. Biblically, like I said, I don't see anything that says there is or isn't. I think the important thing to remember as Christians is that our job is right here. Our job is right here. It's to preach the gospel and to stand in the truth.
Well, when I was speaking about self-discipline, in my mind, I was really applying it to people in government. They are constrained by the Constitution and the laws of our country, and they do not have the power to say, you cannot re-enter your home. That power is nowhere in the law. Now, I think the governor of a state or the president of the United States may impose emergency powers to prevent that under certain circumstances, but certainly 3 months after an event, 4 months after an event, and this lunatic mayor in LA telling people that they can't go back to their homes, that they're not going to be allowed to clean up their own disaster is just shameful. And she needs to go. Gavin Newsom needs to go. And whoever's pulling the strings in North Carolina and preventing people to get into their homes need to go. And these people need to self-discipline themselves, not to expand their power beyond what the law provides. And, growing up, I always took a lot of comfort in that law enforcement and people in power had rails that they couldn't cross, that there were guardrails from people abusing power. But somewhere along the way, it seems like the guardrails have come down, and now we've got these people that just think that they are smarter than everybody else, and that they are somehow justified in telling everybody else what to do. And then we find people like Anthony Fauci, who we now know just lied. He just simply lied. There was no science, none, that said 6 feet was necessary for social distancing or that it would do anything. There is no science that says that masks would stop the spread of COVID. Yet he pretty much single-handedly decreed it, and everybody went along with it, including President Trump and people that were in positions of leadership. But we had never dealt with this in the modern era before. So what do? You rely on somebody who tells you that they're following the science. Well, what they told us was an out-and-out lie. How do we know that? Because we found the memos, and we realized that they were going outside the normal government email servers so they could operate in the shadows and without light being shined on what they did. Ergo, there was no self-discipline to regulate their own power. How do we get the genie back in the bottle?
Honestly, I believe it's faith. In order to have a strong country, you need to have people who are not afraid. And the only way to live without fear in this day and age is to have a strong, solid foundation in the Word of God. So I really believe that the more that we see revival, the more that people come to a true relationship with Jesus Christ, the better our nation will become, simply because they are not pawns. When people are living in fear, they are completely controllable. And there are many government studies and many experiments that the government has done looking at how to control populations through fear. So how do you get away from it? How do you change yourself from a person who's wrapped up in anxiety and worry into someone who's confident? That comes from the Word of God. That comes from steady, daily growing and knowing who God is and having a relationship with Him.
Well, this country was founded on principles of faith and religion. We've always made room for all religions, but the day the Supreme Court declared prayer in schools unconstitutional, I think was the day that our nation entered a moral decline. And I think that I'm all in favor of respecting the sensitivities of other people and not making young children feel uncomfortable because they pray to a different God. I get it, and I don't want to force it on people. but there has to be some way of restoring foundational values in children so that they can grow up with some sort of a moral compass to guide them in their decision making and the choices that they make. And I remember when I was in school a long, long time ago, we would say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we would read a chapter or a passage from the Bible every morning before we started school. And that's when the home family unit was intact. And my concern is that the family unit has disintegrated, and many children lack appropriate role models, or really just plain don't have any parents. A lot of times the grandmother will come in to parent the child, but the grandmother is 24 years old or 28 years old. So that's not working out so good. I agree with what you're saying, Shilo. I just hope that that the leaders of our country can see it for what it is and realize that we've got to reclaim morality in our country, that truth should be the common denominator that we can all agree on in all decisions that are made. So where can our listeners find you and learn more about you?
They can go to my website, shilocreed.com. I do have a Got Questions page with other interviews and media appearances that I've made. They can also contact me there if they have questions about the book, or if they've read the book and have questions about the story. They can connect directly with me there. Of course, Plunged is for sale on Amazon and everywhere books are sold. It's got audio, ebook, and print versions. And the next 2 books in the series are on pre-order right now.
So we know that you're a good author. We know that you're a delightful and pleasant person. And we've also just learned that you're one good salesperson as well. No shame in that, Shilo. Thank you for coming on The Truth today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.